I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
So how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm good. We're having some technical difficulties. So we're, you guys don't know what we're doing behind the scenes, but trying to get this together. I'm all right. I'm not in my home. I've got a picture behind me, but I'm down in South Carolina with my daughter, who unfortunately lost her home in an apartment fire on Tuesday. So she's okay and our cat's okay, but it's been a week for sure. So, and you don't have any electricity at home, so you're trying to find Wi-Fi.
I'm searching the island for Wi-Fi right now, but in a very privileged way, So I have nothing to complain about. But let's go back to what's going on with the young people. I don't know if we want to say names or not, but what happened and how are you managing that, especially, amidst all the things that are going on in the world? This is like a personal experience that you're having.
Yeah, it's been a hard week. She called me on Tuesday. On her way, she was trying to leave work. She had gotten an alert on she had a Ring door cam, and she had gotten an alert. And when she looked on it, she saw smoke and people running. And so she has a cat that she loves very, very much. And she was 20 minutes away from home. So she called me trying to leave the building and trying to tell me what was happening, not knowing what was happening. So I stayed on the phone with her the whole drive home, the 20 minutes, and then she pulled into the apartment complex and saw her building engulfed in flames. And as a mom, I'll never forget listening to her scream, as she's pleading with them to get her cat out of the apartment. And so the cat was found, not by the firemen. They didn't go through, but the maintenance guys in her apartment building took pity on her, and they opened the front door and he was hiding in the living room. So they were able to get him, but we don't know if any of her stuff is salvageable. So we've been spending this week trying to find her a new place to live. Very grateful for the resources that we have to be able to make that happen. And so she secured a new place a couple of days ago, and she will have access to it based on when this is going to drop. She'll have access to it tomorrow, so we can start rebuilding her place. So it's been a crazy week.
And I'm grateful, and I'm she's okay, that she wasn't home, that the cat was recovered in the way that it was recovered. And it just makes me think about, it's just a reminder that real life is going on as there's, as these layers of chaos are going on, like around us in our environments, all this element of not only taking care of community, but when there's crisis that happens in our personal lives, what are the measures that we can take to adjust to that, to continue to have our eyes on what's going on outside of our personal lives while we're also dealing with like major issues happening in our personal lives. And it's really a hard navigation. It's getting more and more difficult to navigate in the US. There's so much changes and things that people are not used to experiencing typically in US territory.
Yeah. I mean, I was making a list of all the things that I knew about that were happening in the world right now for that we could talk about. And the list is so long.
I know it is. And it's like, we want to have this conversation and also take time for, what's actually going on in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we balance that? Like, what is the measure of balancing that? As people are coming on, listening to our podcast, going about their lives, we acknowledge and recognize and thank everyone who are our listeners. That real life is happening. So if there's ever a moment where we're talking about something impact on your life in some way, we would love to hear about that, because that's important for us to know what the impacts are of things that are happening in our local scale, on a national level, and then on a global scale, as we're working through it. And some of those things that you're talking about, letting me know, was this list that you created for us amidst all of what you're dealing with in real life. You want to name one of them, and let's go at it.
Yeah,
Have a whole
so many things. So the one that was at the top of my list was what has been happening in the past few days of more technical gremlins. So I was just going to offer one of the things that I put at the top of my list that I give a fuck about right now is Israel returning boxes of bones to the Palestinians in Gaza. And those bones are not identifiable. Many of them don't have skulls. This is not unusual for Israel. They have made a practice of harvesting organs from Palestinians in past years. When Palestinians would die in custody, their bodies would be returned to their families with obvious surgical scarring to show that someone had cut into the body and removed things. So this is not new, and they just dumped 66 boxes of these bones into Palestinian territory to supposedly return, the bodies to their loved ones, but they're not identifiable. Nobody knows who they are, and they're missing whole parts of their bodies, and obviously all the organs are gone because it's just bones. So that's happening. If anybody's trying to tell you there's a ceasefire in Palestine, it is not true. They are actively bombing them, as they have been. It's never stopped. And so that is happening right now.
Have you been in touch with your are they the family in Palestine? Are they seeing some of these things? Where are they along their safety and the experience that they're having on their homeland?
They're experiencing some of the bombing. I don't know that they have seen or been close to these bones being dumped by Israel into their territory. They're right now struggling with having to pay $500 for their swath of dirt that their tent is on as rent, and trying to keep up with those bills. And so, they're experiencing all of these things. Every time I hear of another bombing campaign, I reach out to Dr. Muhammad and ask him if they are all intact. It feels very strange to ask them if they're okay, because I know they're not. That doesn't feel like the appropriate question, but I don't know what else to ask. The only other thing I can think of to ask is, are you all still alive? Which feels... It feels more accurate, but might be more triggering. So I just touch base with him as much as I can. And he did just recently get accepted for an educational program outside of Gaza. So we're hoping that he will be able to get his paperwork together to be able to get out to go for that, and that he can take his family with him. So that is a new development that we're excited about. And again, the Rafah crossing was supposed to have opened. It didn't open in both directions. And when it did open, it was only allowing very small numbers of people to cross and get out. So that's, the news is reporting that this wonderful thing has happened, that the Rafah crossing has opened, but it's not, as we would expect. It's not what they're saying it is. So that's happening always in our...
One of the things I'm curious about that would be whether or not Dr. Muhammad is aware of the bone dumping, and then if so, is there a cultural practice that the people in Palestine have where they will be able to honor the return of those remains and do some type of ceremonial processing to deal with the grief and the loss and the way that these remains are coming back? I'm just wondering if there's like a cultural difference, because I would imagine that for me, with that type of level of loss and having that return, there would be some type of I would want to create some type of ceremonial honoring. So at least I have that process, even if it's not identified to my specific person. It's like kind of a collective grieving, healing process that, you know, could ensue. And I'm curious whether or not the culture holds those type of
Yeah.
practices.
I don't know the full answer to that. I haven't asked him. I'm very mindful of asking of those kinds of questions, especially relating to bodies and bones and things, just because I can't even imagine how horrible that must be to talk about. I do know that, and of course, we know that Palestinians, the people in Gaza, are not all Muslims, so they're not all going to have the same ceremony and ritual. And if we don't know who these bones belong to, you know, then I'm curious about how they make a decision, you know, of how they're going to honor these folks. I would imagine they utilize, you know, especially when you can't identify who they are, utilize what we would call maybe a mass grave, a place where they can be buried together. But I don't know.
I'm curious, like, also now that's making me think of when Israel was returning, what was the energy and the intention with which they were returning the bones, like as a part of cultural practice? Is that what, you know, folks from Israel do with their people and their bones? What is the significance? I'm looking at what the significance of this effort and action and what the narrative storytelling around it is. Like, we recognize that you experienced this loss, this level of loss at our hands. And so here are I'm just trying to understand the negotiation of what it actually means culturally and how our families receiving it, and what does the level of honor look like? And was this Israel sticking it in your face, or was it Israel saying, here are your remains for you to do what we know in cultural practice there is? I'm trying to access what the humanity is, if there's any in the action, because it's a strange thing to me. I don't know how to think about it.
I mean, I haven't researched deeply this most recent, because this is kind of new. I don't believe there's any humanity in anything that Israel does.
It's recording.
Yeah, there is no humanity in anything that Israel does. You know, I would imagine that they are really just trying to assert their or remind the Palestinians that they are in control of everything. Not only are they in control of snatching their people at any moment and keeping them imprisoned with no charges for years on end, but if they kill them or die in prison, then they will not return their bodies in any kind of honorable state. So to me, it feels like a control. You know, this is what we have control over, and this is how we treat your loved ones. They've been doing this for decades. This is not new to this particular conflict of the past 2.5 years. It's not a conflict; it's a genocide. So no, there's no humanity to it. They know, especially for any Palestinians who identify as Muslim, you know, it's an important thing. You bury your loved ones as quickly as you can after their death.
Okay.
You bury them, you know, intact, of course. So to be returning a body with pieces of it missing is a direct fuck you to the people who loved those people. So yeah, no humanity whatsoever.
I'm sorry to hear that. I am sorry to hear that, and I hope that they can find some peace. And what is also fascinating as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about what I've said previously is the political project that what's happening in Palestine and how it's transferring over to what we're seeing in the United States with ICE, and the way that ICE is being given complete autonomy to just be in community, dealing with US citizens however they're choosing, with no accountability, with no due process, and with full ability to operate however they want to. And I'm just seeing the similarities, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are on those similarities as well.
Well, the similarities are they're a direct correlation because ICE agents are being trained by IOF soldiers. So everything that ICE is doing on the streets in the US right now is a direct correlation to what's happening in Israel. And this has been something right. And so this has been something I've been learning about in the past 2.5 years as I unpack, all of the connections, the connectivity that we have between the violence here and the violence over there. And so yeah, the everything, the people that are much smarter than me when it comes to all of this that I've been listening to over the past 2.5 years have always said, whatever's happening in Israel is going to be, they're going to bring it here, right? And we've talked about this before too, that Israel is a testing ground for surveillance and occupation, and we've connected it.
Movement.
Right. In past episodes, we've talked about the cop cities that have been popping up across the US, that those are really, you can think about those as mini bases. The US has military bases all around the world. Those cop cities are really, that's what that is just to concentrate that kind of control in, particular cities to control the movement and the freedom of the citizens that live around those areas. And so yeah, ICE is operating everything we see ICE doing. They have learned from the IOF. They have been taught how to do this. And ICE officers, these people are not trained well. They are not background checked. They are given $50,000 signing bonuses for joining the IOF. Or listen to me, for joining the ICE. It is the IOF. It's the same thing. 3 letters, just a little different. Yes. And they don't have, they have no de-escalator, they have no training. They're just given badges, guns, and said, go for it. And we're seeing that, in the killings of the Renee Good and Alex Preddy and Keith Porter. There's no accountability, as we've all been watching this. So yeah, it's all of a piece. It's all the same. It's the same manual. And I know a lot of people compare them to the Nazis because that's something that we, in our modern mindset, have. I've also heard them compared, and what resonates better with me is the slave catchers, that this is all a part of the way this country operated. Yeah.
I keep on referring to ISIS modern day KKK, in my opinion. So if you're not in alignment with, what the administration's priority is, if you are outside of what they believe to be who is a valued citizen in the United States, then you are a target for them. And so this is not just about black and white. This is just about your orientation outside of what is being pushed as the acceptable norm in the United States, which is a very nuclear, a very, family structure. It's a very structure formulated in Western heteropatriarchy, man, woman, children, Christian, in a way that we haven't experienced in U.S. territory in centuries, really. Well, no, I'm not going to say that. Maybe
60 years.
Yeah, 60. But I'm just like the narrative about the United States being like, a melting pot where people can come for the American dream and all of that kind of stuff. That's the narrative that I have existed growing up under. And that narrative is more heavily about existing in Western civilization, white heteropatriarchy, and like a norm that is outside of the reality of how people exist in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and if you think about the history of this country and how it was founded and how it was formed, the slave patrols were put in place to try to, control the property that the white landowners had. And then when emancipation came down, those slave patrols translated into our modern day policing, translated into police departments, and then from that came the KKK. So you can draw a timeline that shows exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and I know this, but I'm like saying to folks that haven't thought about this before, that's like, when you find yourself thinking that this behavior that we're seeing right now is Nazi behavior, I'm not saying that doesn't maybe necessarily correlate, but Hitler came over here, sent people, envoys over to the US to do a deep dive about how we did chattel slavery, because he wanted to learn how we did that and translate that into what he did during World War II. So we're seeing the concentration camps coming back. We're seeing people being snatched and disappeared and put into camps, all in the U.S., but in other neighboring areas as well.
All across the globe, we're seeing the differentiation amongst. We're seeing it in real time. We know that there's this underlying conversation about the differentiation between who is a valued person and who is not a valued person, who is property. So, like, if we're running it back to thinking about the slave catcher mentality, when we're talking about protecting property, we're actually talking about protecting humans. So if we're saying that and speaking into that, I would choose not to use the language property to remind people that people are not property.
Right.
And they're valued. They should be valued on the same level, regardless of how they fall in their productivity. They're still humans, and they still should be considered to be able to live in the autonomy of their humanness, as long as they are not harming themselves and harming others. But we are seeing systems and structures that are harming others, and not being the most effective within itself, actually. So harming itself and harming others. And we're just continuing this cycle of violence amongst each other that is real. I want to really think about, like, what some of the solutions to all of this will be, as we're seeing more and more over surveillance, and we're seeing these political projects being transmuted across the globe. That's the wrong word. Being proliferated across the globe, especially in the United States, where most people look to the United States as a place of freedom and liberation, unless you're from marginalized communities that's had an experience of oppression.
Freedom and liberation only for specific humans,
for white people, white males particularly, because white women still are in the struggle. Well, you can speak to that.
I don't think we are. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. And I know we've talked about that before. I heard somebody say the other day they're referring to the white elites as the Epstein class now, and so to me that's a phrase that really resonated with me, because now we're seeing the Epstein files as they're being released. Drip, drip, drip. Yeah. So the Epstein files are being released very slowly, and there are a lot of emails and a lot of information coming out of the people that were involved with Epstein, some names some that would shock you and some that don't. One that kind of got me a little bit was Deepak Chopra, as a person who had a reputation. I know that he had a reputation that was of forward thinking and and new age and new enlightened being. Well, guess what? So
people are people. We have to remember that humans are humans, and value people for being humans and being in their human movement. I don't really, at this point, I'm never surprised at people showing up in any particular way, because I've heard about so many people that we decide to put on pedestals and create expectations for them. But people are all people. We're all existing the same way. We still all need to eat. We all need to drink water, and we all need to release that from our bodies to continue to exist. So I'm never surprised. But what I was saying is I'm not really sure like what the depth of the context of the Epstein files and like what is being found out about whomever has been participating in whatever Mr. Epstein was doing.
I mean, it's a lot of information. It's very intricate. There's a lot of emails that are very revealing about,
Is it sexual prowess or is it like,
yes, it's pedophilia. It's human trafficking of children,
okay.
of girls and young boys. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't understand like what like the underlying major issue was.
No,
yes.
The biggest issue is the human trafficking. I mean, that's one of the that's the thing, and the scope of the people that are involved in that.
Oh gosh! And then thinking about these return bones, and all of the way that we know that there's a conversation that we don't know about, and seeing like the effects of that is really.
And we know Epstein is connected to Israel, is connected to Mossad, is connected to, and we know how many pedophiles from the U.S. flee to Israel because they will not be persecuted in Israel. So there is a deep cesspool of connection between the horrific things that have been taking place in the U.S. and Israel's connection to hiding that, protecting that, creating a space for the perpetrators of that to be safely residing. So yeah, it's all coming out. I mean, you would think somebody that was going to run. So that also speaks to their feeling of impunity, the whiteness, the sense of the elite that I'm untouchable. The amount of blatant conversation in writing in these emails
is my tolerance
disgusting.
For that is getting very low. My tolerance for that is getting very low of not valuing people for people. I'm feeling that in my bones that like when I start seeing that amongst people, I'm like, y'all need to roll it back because we are really losing our sense of human connection with each other. And I feel like I'm a broken record repeating that every single episode. But I also think that a part of the solutions is to remind us and to point out the ways and the spaces and places that we are losing our human connection with one another. The ways that we are missing what's most important about continuing to evolve as humans on this earth. We have to be in consideration of each other in ways beyond, if you are not of considered value, then you don't matter and can be unalived or removed from the position. And the folks that are coming up with this are likened to me as like real tantrum having spoiled like bullies that are holding this space and making decisions about what humanity should look like, and it's unacceptable.
And what versions of humanity are considered worthy of care and consideration. And it goes deeper. I mean, child sacrificing, and it's pictures of child sacrifices. It's pretty disgusting. And there are many who would say we knew this all along. And, but those of us who are now paying attention are unpacking, the indoctrination and the narrative that we've been taught all this time, that all of this was false.
And it's being exposed.
Yes.
To your point, pictures and things like that. And we have to take some caution, because I know a lot of things are being created where you have to be able to discern between AI and not AI, narrative. And
well, you can access the straight up files. You can look at them for yourself online. So
they're allowing access to the Epstein files now? I did not.
Yes, that's when they say the Epstein files have been released. That's what they mean, that they are now made released to the public, and it's not everything. We've only seen a very, very small percentage of what's out there.
The Bible, they're picking and choosing what they want people to know.
But but the stuff that's out there is pretty,
Horrible.
it's pretty damning. And it's pretty, so it's being cherry picked. It's very heavily redacted, which means, people's names and things are blacked out, but the victims are not being redacted. So they're outing the victims, but they're not outing the perps.
That is such a harmful and violent way of doing things, because it should be victim-centered.
Very, very harmful.
Meet the needs of the victim and not the aggressors and the perpetrators. Like, how backwards are we, where we're not protecting those who have been violated and harmed, but we are protecting those who are the aggressors? And like, this goes back to my understanding of restorative practice and why it's so important to be thinking about asking the questions of what happened, who was impacted, what have you thought about before, and what would you do to actually make amends for these people? And step one is not outing the person that was harmed.
I know.
Or outing the person. I mean, like, if I'm thinking in the total restorative, outing the behavior that has impacted so many people, and talk about what the solutions to making amends for that behavior.
Yeah, no amends part of this. No amends.
Of course not. And returning bones is not an amends, especially with like some type of cultural context and being in consideration of what people need to grieve and to move through loss in the way that they're experiencing it there in Palestine, and the way that we're experiencing it on U.S. territory and across the globe, where there's violence and people being snatched and taken away under this guise of what I'm calling the New World Order. And many people also do, the new conspiracy of violence and harm that's occurring. Yeah.
Well, we got through it. we got through the episode.
We had a conversation. It's not the way that we like having our conversations, but
no, it's not. But thank you all for bearing with us, and we'll see you next time on our next episode. What do we do?
More stable connection, we hope.
Yes, hopefully.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.